In the dead of winter in 1959, 9 experienced hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, embarked on what was supposed to be a challenging but achievable adventure into the Ural Mountains. None of them could have imagined that this journey would lead to one of the most chilling and perplexing mysteries in modern history. Welcome to Shrouded Mysteries, where we dive deep into some of the world's most unsettling and unsolved enigmas. Here, we explore the shadows of reality, mysteries that sometimes defy explanation. Some stories are more disturbing than others, but as they say, truth is often stranger than fiction. Stay with us as we uncover the events behind Dyatlov Pass incident and much more. They were young, bright students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, each with their own dreams and ambitions. Their fields of study ranged from engineering to radio technology, and together they formed a close-knit group bound by their shared passion for adventure. At the helm was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a seasoned mountaineer and a natural leader. Known for his meticulous planning and calm under pressure, Dyatlov was the glue that held the group together, and his leadership would be crucial for what they thought would be a challenging but rewarding trek. Zina Kolmogorova, energetic and brave, was one of Dyatlov's closest friends. Though never officially confirmed, there was an unspoken bond between the two, one that hinted at something more than friendship. Though it remained a mystery, she was a fearless spirit, known for her determination, and someone who thrived in the face of adversity. Rustem Slobodin, an accomplished athlete with a quick sense of humor, added lightheartedness to the group. Despite his background, his father was a successful businessman, Rustem embraced a simpler, rugged life. He was known for his strength, both physical and mental, which made him an essential part of the team. Lyudmila Dubinina was fiercely independent, passionate, and unyielding in the face of challenges. She loved adventure and often sought out experiences that pushed her to the limit. Tragically, her story would end in one of the most horrifying ways imaginable, a grim foreshadowing of the events that would soon unfold. Together, this group of young adventurers set out on what they thought would be an unforgettable journey, but none of them could have imagined the nightmare that awaited them in the icy wilderness of the Ural Mountains. The group also included Yuri Doroshenko, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Alexander Kolovatov, and 2 others who joined last minute, Semyon Zolotaryov and Yuri Krivonishenko. Little did they know that they were stepping into what would become one of the darkest chapters in Russian history. The expedition began without incident, and spirits were high as they made their way through the dense forests and snow-covered terrain. The group even kept detailed diaries and took photographs along the way, showcasing their enthusiasm despite the biting cold. In their journal entries, they joked about the icy wind and celebrated small victories with songs around the campfire. Zina Kolmogorova described the beauty of the wilderness, while Krivonishenko wrote about the cold that seeped through their layers of clothing. But his words were always accompanied by a sense of optimism. Yet, as they journeyed deeper into the wilderness, the landscape around them became more hostile and the weather worsened. On February 1st, the group reached the slopes of Kolatsiakl, a name which ominously translates to Mountain of the Dead in the local Mansi language. Rather than descending to a nearby forested area for shelter, they inexplicably set up camp on the exposed mountain slope. Was it a strategic decision, or was it simply an error of judgment caused by the fatigue of the day's trek? Whatever the reason, this decision would seal their fate. What happened next remains one of the most perplexing mysteries of the 20th century. As night fell, on February 1st, 1959, The temperature plunged far below freezing. The wind howled across the mountain, tearing at the thin walls of the tent that now sheltered the 9 hikers. They had set up camp with the knowledge that this would be one of the most challenging nights of the expedition. No one could have predicted it would also be their last. The group had settled in for the evening, eating their meager rations and preparing to rest. Photographs from earlier that day show smiling faces despite the bitter cold. Little did they know, these would be the last pictures ever taken of them alive. Sometime during the night, something went horribly wrong. Around midnight, something or someone seemed to have terrified the hikers, leading them to cut their way out of their tent from the inside. No one knows why they felt compelled to abandon the warmth and safety of their shelter. They fled into the freezing wilderness barefoot, without coats, despite the minus 30 degrees Celsius temperatures. Their tracks, found later, revealed they had walked or run down the slope, seemingly in panic, but organized enough to stick together at first. Rustam Slobodin, known for his strength and endurance, was one of the first to try and find help, heading toward the tree line. Yet, his body was discovered with a fractured skull. Though he had a head injury, it wasn't the trauma that killed him. He had died of hypothermia. The injuries suggested confusion and disorientation, common symptoms of severe cold. It's likely that he stumbled in the darkness, hitting his head, but why had he been running in the first place? Close by, Yuri Doroshenko and Krivonishenko were found huddled near the remains of a small fire under a large cedar tree. Their bodies were stripped of their outer clothing, suggesting that they had succumbed to paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where severe hypothermia causes a sensation of overheating, leading victims to remove their clothes. The 2 men appeared to have tried to climb the tree, possibly in a desperate attempt to see their camp or spot help, but they had ultimately failed. As searchers ventured further into the forest, they discovered the remaining bodies, scattered in various states of undress and disarray. The last 4 hikers, Zolotaryov, Dubinina, Thibaut Brignol, and Kolevatov, were discovered several months later in a ravine, their injuries far more severe and mysterious. Dubinina's ribs had been crushed, and her tongue was missing. Zolotaryov also had severe chest injuries, similar to those caused by a high-speed car crash. Yet, there were no external wounds to explain such trauma, nor was there any sign of a struggle with an animal or another person. Igor Dyatlov himself was found not far from the tent, as if he had tried to return. He was clutching a small branch in his hand, his body twisted in the snow. His expression was one of agony, frozen in time by the cold. The scene was baffling. What could have caused such panic in the middle of the night? How had the hikers, experienced as they were, found themselves in such a dire situation? And what kind of force could crush bones without leaving a mark on the skin? On February 26, 1959, nearly a month after the hikers were last heard from, a search party consisting of volunteer rescuers and military personnel stumbled upon the remnants of the doomed expedition. Led by Mikhail Sharavin, a student from the same Ural Polytechnic Institute, the team had been combing through the thick snow and treacherous terrain, desperate to find any sign of life or answers to the hikers' disappearance. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a tattered, snow-covered tent, half buried and eerily still. It sat exposed on the wind-swept slope of Kholat Syakhl, a ghostly silhouette against the vast, white landscape. As the rescuers approached, they immediately noticed something unusual. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. Large, jagged cuts marred the fabric. As if the hikers had been in such a state of terror or urgency that they hadn't even taken the time to use the entrance. Inside, all their belongings were intact. The group's warm clothes, boots, and survival gear remained carefully arranged as if they had intended to return at any moment. But that moment never came. The air around the tent was heavy with an unsettling sense of abandonment. Sharavan later recalled that the scene felt almost frozen in time, as if something had abruptly interrupted the hikers in the middle of an ordinary night. Scattered footprints led away from the tent, down the slope toward the nearby tree line. Strangely, the prints indicated that most of the hikers had been barefoot or only wearing socks, a puzzling and chilling discovery considering the deadly cold of the night. The rescuers followed the tracks, expecting to find the hikers nearby, perhaps huddled together in a desperate attempt to keep warm. Instead, they found death. The first bodies, those of Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, were discovered at the edge of the forest, beneath a towering cedar tree. Their bodies were stripped down to their underwear, lying next to the remains of a small fire that had long since burned out. The bark of the tree had been scratched away, as if in a frantic attempt to climb higher, perhaps to escape something or get a better view of their surroundings. The flesh on their hands was raw, their fingers splintered and bloodied, suggesting they had tried in vain to ascend the tree. What were they so desperate to see or escape? Nearby, a grim detail added to the mystery. Fragments of Krivonishenko's skin were found lodged between his teeth, indicating he had bitten himself, possibly in a fit of pain or delirium. The oddity of this scene only deepened as rescuers found that the two men had burns on their bodies, though no one could determine how they had occurred. The fire they had built was far too small and weak to have caused such damage. What had burned them? As the search continued, more bodies began to emerge from the snow, their positions and conditions only raising more questions. Rustam Slobodin was found farther up the slope, lying face down in the snow, his head turned in the direction of the tent. Unlike Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, he had been partially dressed, wearing a coat and boots. Yet, this did nothing to save him from the fatal cold. An autopsy later revealed that Slobodin had suffered a skull fracture, a blow severe enough to render him unconscious or disoriented, but there were no signs of external trauma to suggest how it had happened. Nearby, the lifeless body of Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, was discovered. He too appeared to have been heading back toward the tent, clutching a small branch in one hand, his other hand frozen in a fist. His face was twisted in agony, as if he had died in the throes of some terrible struggle. The rescuers noted that Dyatlov's position, and those of his fellow hikers, suggested that they had all been attempting to return to the safety of their tent. But what had driven them out into the cold in the first place? The final and perhaps most disturbing discoveries came months later, when the last 4 hikers were found deep in a ravine, buried beneath several feet of snow. Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol had suffered far more gruesome and enigmatic fates. Dubinina's body, when uncovered, presented an especially shocking sight. Her eyes were missing, and her tongue had been removed, as though it had been ripped out. The absence of any blood or tissue around the wounds suggested these injuries had occurred after her death, but by what or whom remained unknown. Was it scavengers, as some experts suggested, or something more sinister? Semyon Zolotaryov, despite his experience and physical strength, had suffered severe chest injuries. His ribs had been crushed with a force likened to that of a car crash. Thibault Brignol had a similar fate, with a fractured skull, yet neither of their bodies showed external signs of trauma. It was as if their bones had been shattered from the inside out by some unexplainable pressure or force. Adding to the mystery was the clothing found on the bodies. Some of the victims were wearing each other's clothes, as if they had scavenged items from the already dead in a desperate attempt to stay warm. More bizarrely, traces of radiation were detected on several pieces of clothing, a finding that baffled investigators and fueled speculation about the hikers' exposure to something far more dangerous than the elements. The state of the bodies, the scattered possessions, and the strange injuries all pointed to something beyond a simple accident. But what had driven 9 experienced hikers to flee their tent in such a state of panic? And why had some of them suffered such horrific injuries, while others simply froze to death? No animal tracks or signs of struggle were found near the site, and there were no indications of an avalanche, which had initially been considered a possible explanation. The discovery of the hikers' bodies left the search team, the Soviet authorities, and eventually the world with more questions than answers. The lack of any clear explanation turned the Dyatlov Pass incident into one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. The case was closed later that year with the vague conclusion that the hikers had died due to a compelling natural force, a phrase that did little to quell the growing speculation about what had truly happened that fateful night. To this day, the discovery of the bodies in Dyatlov Pass remains a haunting chapter in the annals of unsolved mysteries. The broken tent, the strange injuries, the missing eyes and tongue, and the traces of radiation all contribute to the eerie enigma that continues to capture the imagination of conspiracy theorists, scientists, and storytellers alike. Let's go with the theories. The discovery of the bodies and the baffling circumstances surrounding their deaths led to an outpouring of theories, each attempting to explain the unspeakable horrors that the 9 hikers endured on Kholat Syakhl. But none have been able to conclusively answer the many questions posed by the case. As time passed, the Dyatlov Pass incident became fertile ground for speculation, spawning numerous theories that ranged from the plausible to the downright bizarre. These explanations, some rooted in science, others in conspiracy or the supernatural, each attempted to fill in the dark gaps left by the events of that fateful night. The avalanche theory. One of the earliest and most conventional theories was that the hikers were caught in an avalanche, which forced them to flee their tent in panic. According to this theory, the slashing of the tent from the inside could be explained by the group's desperate attempt to escape the collapsing snow. The violent injuries suffered by some of the hikers could have been caused by the crushing weight of the snow or rocks tumbling down the slope. However, this theory, despite being favored by the Soviet authorities at the time, raised as many questions as it answered. For one, the slope on which the hikers camped was not steep enough to trigger an avalanche, according to experts. Additionally, there were no signs of a significant snowslide in the area when the rescue team arrived. The tent, though partially collapsed, was still largely intact, and the footprints leading away from it were clearly visible, something unlikely if an avalanche had buried the campsite. Most damning, the nature of the injuries, particularly the severe internal trauma without corresponding external wounds, didn't align with typical avalanche-related deaths. This left the avalanche theory, though plausible in some respects, incomplete in explaining the full scope of the tragedy. Katabatic winds. Another natural explanation revolved around the possibility of katabatic winds, a rare but deadly meteorological phenomenon. Katabatic winds are violent, cold gusts of air that descend from high elevations, capable of causing extreme disorientation and freezing temperatures in a short span of time. It's possible that the hikers, in a moment of panic induced by these powerful winds, left the tent in haste to seek shelter among the trees. The chaos of the moment could explain why they fled without adequate clothing, and how some of the hikers became separated from the group. However, like the avalanche theory, this explanation had its weaknesses. Katabatic winds, while dangerous, don't account for the severe internal injuries found on several of the hikers, nor does it explain the traces of radiation found on some of their clothing, or the missing eyes and tongue of Lyudmila Dubinina. While katabatic winds might have played a role in disorienting the hikers, they failed to account for the more sinister aspects of the incident: military testing and secret weapons. One of the most controversial and enduring theories is that the hikers accidentally stumbled into a top-secret Soviet military testing ground and became the unwitting victims of experimental weapons. Some have speculated that parachute mines, a type of aerial weapon, were being tested in the area. These mines, which detonate in the air rather than upon impact with the ground, could have created a powerful shockwave that caused the hikers traumatic internal injuries without leaving external marks. The explosions might also explain the glowing orange orbs seen in the sky around the time of the incident, sightings reported by other hikers and residents in the region. This theory gained traction when investigators found odd burn marks on some of the bodies, as well as traces of radiation on the clothing. Could these have been the result of exposure to experimental weaponry? The Soviet Union was known to conduct military experiments in remote areas, and it's not unthinkable that the Dyatlov group may have inadvertently camped too close to one of these sites. The radiation, while minimal, was another suspicious element that fueled speculation about secret government activities. But despite the circumstantial evidence, this theory has its own holes. There is no concrete proof that military testing was taking place in the Ural Mountains at that time, and Soviet officials, despite their reluctance to divulge information, never acknowledged any such operations. Additionally, no unexploded mines or military debris were found at the site, leaving the theory tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive. Infrasound phenomenon. A more unusual yet scientifically plausible theory is the infrasound hypothesis. This theory, proposed by researcher Donny Icar in his 2013 book Dead Mountain, suggests that a specific weather condition known as the Kármán vortex street could have created low-frequency sound waves, infrasound, that induced feelings of extreme discomfort, dread, and panic in the hikers. Infrasound is a sound that is below the threshold of human hearing, but can cause powerful physiological and psychological effects, including nausea, anxiety, and a sensation of unease. According to this theory, the winds passing over the mountain could have produced infrasound that disoriented the hikers, causing them to flee their tent in a state of irrational fear. This panic-driven behavior might explain why they left behind their belongings and ventured into the freezing night with little or no protective clothing. While the infrasound theory is intriguing and could explain the seemingly irrational behavior of the hikers, it doesn't account for the severe physical injuries some of them suffered, nor does it explain the radiation on their clothing. As with many of the theories, it provides part of the puzzle, but leaves critical pieces unresolved. Animal attack. Some have speculated that the group was attacked by a wild animal, possibly a bear or a wolf, which might explain why they fled the tent in such a hurry. However, the absence of tracks or evidence of a struggle makes this theory difficult to support. There were no animal footprints around the campsite, and the injuries found on the bodies didn't match those typically inflicted by large predators. Moreover, an animal attack wouldn't account for the missing eyes and tongue of Lyudmila Dubinina, nor the radiation traces on the victim's clothes. Yeti or cryptid attack. Veering into more fantastical territory, some have proposed that the hikers fell victim to an attack by a cryptid, possibly a yeti or similar creature. This theory is popular among paranormal enthusiasts and was given a boost by a photograph found on one of the hikers' cameras, which shows a blurry, human-like figure standing among the trees. Some interpret this as evidence that the group encountered something terrifying in the wilderness, something far from human. Despite its appeal to conspiracy theorists and fans of the paranormal, there is no concrete evidence to support the Yeti theory. The injuries sustained by the hikers were severe, but they didn't suggest an attack by a creature, especially one as elusive as a cryptid. Alien encounter. Perhaps the most far-fetched but enduring theory is that the hikers had a close encounter with extraterrestrial beings. Supporters of this theory point to the strange lights seen in the sky, as well as the radiation on the bodies, as possible evidence of alien involvement. According to this idea, the hikers may have witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, and in the chaos that followed, they fled their tent and met a horrific fate at the hands of otherworldly visitors. While the alien encounter theory is often dismissed by scientists and serious researchers, it remains a staple of popular culture surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident. The lack of solid evidence for this or any other theory has kept the alien hypothesis alive in the minds of those who believe that the answers lie far beyond Earth. Now let's talk about the conspiracy theories and cover-ups. Another theory suggests that the Soviet government, aware of what really transpired on that mountain, orchestrated a cover-up to conceal the true cause of the deaths. This theory has gained traction due to the government's opaque handling of the case, the secrecy surrounding the official investigation, and the vague, non-committal conclusions offered by Soviet authorities at the time. According to conspiracy theorists, the military may have been involved, either accidentally or deliberately causing the deaths of the hikers. Some believe the hikers witnessed classified tests, perhaps of a new weapon or technology, prompting a government cover-up. The radiation detected on their clothes, the unexplained injuries, and the strange orbs of light in the sky are often cited as evidence of some covert operation gone awry. The reopening of the case. In 2019, 60 years after the original incident, the Russian government reopened the investigation into the Dyatlov Pass deaths. However, they ruled out any criminal or nefarious involvement, instead citing an avalanche or natural causes as the most likely explanation. This conclusion did little to satisfy those who believe that something more sinister was at play, and the mystery of what really happened on that snowy mountainside continues to fuel speculation and debate. The legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Despite the array of theories, from natural disasters to government conspiracies and supernatural forces, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most perplexing mysteries of modern times. Each theory offers a possible answer, but none of them fully explains all the strange details surrounding the event. The truth, it seems, is as elusive as the wind that howled over the frozen slopes of Kholat-Syakhl on that fateful night. Even today, the Dyatlov Pass incident stands as a haunting reminder of the dangers that lurk in the remote wilderness, and of the many mysteries that may never be solved. In the end, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains a chilling enigma, a puzzle with pieces that refuse to fit together. Was it a tragic accident, a secret military test gone wrong, or something far more sinister? The truth may never come to light, lost forever in the biting winds of the Ural Mountains. What happened on that cold, desolate night in 1959 has left us with more questions than answers. But perhaps that's the most terrifying part, the unknown. Because in the darkest corners of our world, there are forces, human, natural, and perhaps even beyond, that operate in the shadows, beyond our comprehension, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Whatever the explanation, one fact remains clear. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. Remember, in a world full of unsolved mysteries, what we don't know is often the most terrifying. Stay tuned for more chilling cases right here on Shrouded Mysteries. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode.